But like Sable Phoenix says, I just had Luke throw away his dad's lightsaber. I bet that upsets your expectations, huh? Right, that kind of thing. That's easy to put in there. Moments like that.
Yeah, well, yeah, I think if we're talking about The Last Jedi, it's funny. I had the one of the most contentious episodes I ever recorded of my podcast, the Good Story podcast. We got in such a fight over Last Jedi that I never released the episode because
really?
It was just too contentious. It was painful to listen to. But like there was,
that could have been YouTube gold.
I would say that it could have totally worked to have Luke throw away to have Luke throw away the lightsaber. I think that totally could have worked. And you sort of think that's going to happen at the end of Force Awakens. You're like, does he want this lightsaber? That's the end note of the Force Awakens. It's like he's being offered this lightsaber and he doesn't seem very happy about being handed it. And then I think it totally worked fine in Last Jedi to have him throw it away. I think it did not work at all to go like, that whole mystery we set up in the first movie of whose Rey's parents are. Well, they were nobodies. And I'm like, well, that is what I don't like about defying expectations, because you were defying the expectations of the internet. You're not defying the expectations. You are saying like, oh, the first movie set up this mystery, but it wasn't a mystery for her. She wasn't assuming that her dad was probably Luke Skywalker. She wasn't assuming that she had the secret of the hidden birth. It was all about, that was all about trying to interact with the expectations of the audience in a way where, like, there's nothing worse. There's nothing worse than when you're watching something and they're like, oh, the creator of this work is going to put himself in opposition to you, the reader, and go like, I am going to fight you. I'm going to fight what you want. And and I felt like that was what Last Jedi did too much. I felt like Last Jedi was, and also it was sort of going like, oh, you saw the first trilogy and you saw that we redeemed. It's funny, I just saw Adam Driver being interviewed on Smartless, and he was like, the whole original idea for Kylo Ren was that he was going to go on the opposite journey of Darth Vader, and Darth Vader like started off as the most evil possible person in existence and ended up being redeemed. And they were going to start off with Kylo Ren really not being that bad, and then get worse and worse and worse throughout the three movies. And, so it starts off where it seems like he's going to be redeemed. And then by the end, he's going to be, you're going to realize like, this is the worst possible person. And of course they didn't do that. Of course they redeemed him in the third movie, because ultimately that sequel trilogy was more about recreating the first trilogy than it was about answering it, than it was about moving the story on to a new level. But I thought that was, and then Adam Driver was basically apologizing in this interview, going like, yeah, sorry, we didn't do what we set out to do. We didn't do what we promised that we would do, which is, sort of that moment where Kylo Ren kills Han, kills his father, was supposed to be, that was supposed to be the redemption moment that he then rejects. But inevitably, they felt they needed to redeem him in the final story, which I didn't think worked.
Yeah, so you said, so I'll give the quote here on this subject. First and foremost, audiences don't want you to defy expectations. They want you to create them, because you hear so much about, subverting expectations and things like that. And then you say, it turns out that people don't actually want to say, I had no idea that was going to happen. In fact, they're often delighted to say, I knew that was going to happen. People love to get to know your characters, and they feel clever when they can predict those characters' reactions. Defying expectations is easy. Creating expectations is hard.
Yes.
I love that.
Yes. And that's a big part of my second book, is about how to create expectations. One of the first things I say in my second book is that one of the secrets of great writing is to be repetitive. How you might think like, that's, generally speaking in life, if somebody tells you, Matt, you're repetitive, then that's probably not a compliment. But great writing is repetitive. Great writing hits beats over and over and over again. I talk about rolling the rock uphill, that the more you roll a rock uphill, the more energy you're creating. You're creating kinetic energy every time you push a rock further uphill. And if you are willing to push it uphill over and over and over again for hours, and then you let it go, that then you're releasing a tremendous amount of energy. And that I talk about, I the first book I talk about in Secrets of Character is one of my favorite books, Little Women. And I point out like 5 different places in the first 10 pages where they go specifically through what each of the girls does. And like, now it's time to set the table. Well, here's what each of the 4 girls does when it's time to set the table. Now they're talking about what they're going to buy for Christmas. Here's what each of the 4 girls says. And already by the end of page 10, you're like, oh, that's so Amy. Oh, that's Amy again. Oh, listen to Amy being like Amy. And we love that. We love to say, oh, that's so Amy. Oh my God. And then Louisa May Alcott rolls that rock up for 200 pages. And then she lets it go at the end. And then the characters change and they grow. And you're like, oh, Amy is not being like Amy now. Amy has changed. And it's so wonderful. And that is what we want from stories, is that, just defying expectations right away, defying expectations before you've earned the right to defy expectations is the worst thing a writer can do. And setting expectations is so much better.
Yeah, and I also think that's an excellent point as well that you brought up, that when people are talking about defying expectations, it's whose expectations are you defying? And if it's something that you're setting up inside the story, that's one thing. If it's the audience that's completely interacting outside of the story, it's another. Like I remember George R. R. Martin was saying that early on he was seeing on some websites, like forums, like internet forums, that people were going through his books and they had figured out Jon Snow's parentage.
Mm-hmm.
And he was like, no, wait a minute, what do I do? So, I've set all of that up in the story. You're saying that people are going to go, man, I was right. When it comes out, and like, I knew that was it because listen, I saw all the clues. I set this up. You're saying that's what people want. People don't want him to go, wait a minute. They figured this out. So let me just completely defy everything that I put in the books and completely change it up. And I think that's a really important point.
Oh yeah. Well, obviously the secret there is don't write your series so damn slow. Do not put out a book every 15 years so that people have the time to pour back over. Like it took people years and years. I mean, if he had just written that series at a normal pace, then he would have finished it before people had time to go back and reread the first 5 books so many times that, he had put in very subtle clues as to what Jon Snow's parentage was. And he did exactly what you're supposed to do. It was there. He had planted it, but he had planted it very deep, and it was going to take a long time to spring up, and nobody would have gotten in. But then he said, okay, I'm not going to publish book 6, reread books 1 through 5 over and over and over again. And then because it's the internet, then people, as soon as someone figured it out, because it was beautifully set up, because it's like, oh, suddenly it all makes sense, which is what you always want to have when you have any sort of reveal in the story. You want to have people go like, oh, it hadn't occurred to me, but yes, that makes sense. Then as soon as people figured it out, everyone was like, oh, okay, that's definitely it. This fan theory is correct. And the worst thing you can do, like in the early days of the internet, there were, they did like a big DC Comics crossover where it was going to turn out that, they were all fighting some villain, and they're like, oh, this villain is one of us in the future, some hero. And I forget whether someone just guessed it online or the actual answer leaked out some way, but it leaked out in the very early days of the internet, and then they changed it at the last second to have it be a character that made no sense for it to be that character. And they're like, aha, but we did surprise you, because, we had, instead of having the character who we had subtly set up to be the character, we had a character who would make no sense at all for that character to be the character. And then, an aha, surprise. And people are like, no, this sucks. And you've just ruined a perfectly good character.
I think that's excellent. I think it's an excellent point. I think that's so important in the world, especially today. Maybe we don't hear about it quite as much right now, but man, certainly over the years, defying expectations or subverting expectations was all over the place.
Fulfilling expectations is great, but what's even better is setting expectations.
I talk about how
the easiest thing to do as a writer is to defy expectations. The easiest thing to do is go like, oh, you thought that, like, guess what? I just killed off the hero on page 30. Boy, that blows your mind, doesn't it? That's something that upsets your expectations. But upsetting expectations is one thing, but setting expectations is something else. To say like, I'm going to set an expectation, and then I'm going to upset the expectation, and then I'm going to reset the expectation. And knowing how to set, upset and reset expectations. You can write anything in the world you want to write if you know how to reset expectations, if you know how to create a desire. If you can create a desire, I mean, it's like love. It's like anything. Like if you can, create the desire, then you have total power. And that is, the understanding tone, which is one of the chapters in my book, understanding how to use genre, understanding how to use various tone setting tools is, if you can, every time you see something that it's like, why is that popular? Like, that's not the sort of thing people should like. It's almost always because they are resetting people's expectations and they're creating a demand for something that people didn't know they wanted.